If you do want to discuss elements of the project, again, I would prefer the discussion be focused and not jump back and forth between different elements. Mr. Singleton.
Guess I'm up to bat again, hopefully not a third strike. Well, since we are not going to wait for answers to my questions that I submitted formally as part of the environmental document, is it acceptable to ask them those questions now?
Of course, you can ask any questions you want. Again, Mark Johnson is here to answer questions about the project, and Charlie, I believe Charlie's still here, there he is, who can answer questions about the process.
Okay, first question is really, Mark, you made a comment in your presentation about your plan. You feel that the plan supports transit and alternative modes, and as that relates to the one bullet item, I believe the Planning Commission also had asked for some input on. So how is it that basically you feel that your plan does support all these different transit options in the future that people have talked about, and how can it accommodate non-vehicular based destinations and movement through the park?
Sure, thank you very much. And I have Rob Fitch with me here who can help me on the technical side of this. I think there are two important ways that the plan supports transit and alternative modes. First and foremost, the tram that we are providing as part of the project is designed to be certified to travel across Park Boulevard 6 so that we can serve the full extent of the park, east to west, west to east, connecting directly to the existing public transit systems and perhaps the coming of BRT or some other mode on Park Boulevard over time. So we, for the first time, put in place a working system that will go into operation immediately and that can be extended. Second, one of the things that no other plan, no other alternative has ever proposed is with the addition of the Centennial Road and Bridge, it actually becomes possible to bring other forms of transit all the way through the park without taking, for example, over-the-road heavy transit, whether fixed guideway or other vehicles, through the core, through the Plaza de Palma. So you have the ability now to take transit vehicles right through the park, as the bus once did, by the way, on Laurel Street. The bus, for those that don't know, the city bus used to run from Park Boulevard to 6th and actually had a stop in the Plaza de Panama. And people would use that as free parking to ride the bus downtown. And so I think those are two very important ways. In terms of bicycles in the park, as I'm sure you know, the city's bicycle committee recently approved a bicycle master plan and designated the route, east-west route through Balboa Park as a type 3, which is a shared use path, and the Cabrillo Bridge and our Centennial Road are designed to become that shared path. Rob, am I missing anything? No.
Well, I'll concede that the tram does provide some connections to the edges of the park. I'm not sure how we have a commitment that the tram is going to do anything beyond just servicing the future parking structure behind the Oregon Pavilion up to the museums. I know the plans show it going all the way over to Inspiration Point and over to the west side. But that element of the plan does support alternate modes. But the other elements, in my position, it does not support. It actually precludes and makes it more difficult and removes some of the actual incentives for people to come here other than by car. By making it easier to come by car, a shorter route to get through, removing some of the actual conflict points, and providing more parking are all disincentives for those other modes. So I can agree that the tram will do that, but the tram can work in all the other alternative modes, including all the other alternatives, including the ones that were recommended in the circulation and parking plan that you had done quite a number of years ago. So a second question then would be relative to the claim within the environmental document that with the shorter distance coming across the bridge to a parking structure, with the removal of a number of crossing points that you feel are conflicts with, conflicts between vehicles and people, and with the fact that it's a grade separated entrance route that is admittedly, even the plan, is shorter than the current route, and given the fact that the current way into the park through the West Prado end has some congestion levels, it has a look and feel to it, that it is a pedestrian location. Cars do tend to go through there a lot slower than most other roads. Given all those things, how on earth was it possible for your conclusion to be on the traffic analysis that there would be no increase of traffic coming from that direction?
Well, it did happen on Earth, but I'll ask Rob to chime in.
Thank you. My name is Rob Fitch with Rick Engineering Company. We are the civil engineers and traffic engineers on the project. And essentially, Mr. Singleton, the traffic study that was a component of the environmental document is based on the SANDAG Series 11 forecast models. It was designed or analyzed per the city's traffic impact study manual of 1998 or excuse me, 2008, and the city's CEQA significant determination threshold. So, using the SANDAG forecast models with the input and the nodes of those models forecast, there isn't an increase in traffic coming across the bridge. And so that's how the traffic analysis was studied using those approved forecast models. It is recognized that the Centennial Road is of a shorter length, but the access from the west to the ADA parking and into the Plaza de Panama is not any shorter than it would be from the east access. It's shorter than existing, but the access to the Plaza de Panama ADA parking or the Alcazar parking is closer from the west in either project scenario. So that's how the traffic study was analyzed, and there wasn't a percent increase coming from the west of the order of magnitude that you did assume in your public comments. I did read your comments.
The models I know are not intended to be overly sensitive. They tend to generalize quite a bit. And, but can't you understand where I'm coming from? That given all these positive reasons why you feel that allowing cars to come across the bridge and to grade separate them, remove them from pedestrian conflicts, to actually have a shorter route, isn't it logical that more people will come from that direction? And if not, then what's the benefit out of coming that direction? What's the benefit of all the things that are being proposed with the shorter distance, removing all the pedestrian conflicts, providing the grade separation right into a garage?
If you want to take it out of a traffic model context and put it to a logic context, they have different logics. I don't think anyone has, I certainly have not been able to fully predict how traffic patterns to the park will change with the presence of the garage and the location of the garage. Today we know without question about 42% of the cars are coming from the west across the Cabrillo Bridge. As you've seen me present several times, we also know that about 1,000 cars are traveling up the Pan American Road, turning in the Plaza de Panama and coming back down. So there's, if you bear with me, 1,000 extra cars making an unnecessary movement in the core of the park today. I don't think those unnecessary movements, first and foremost, will happen because people looking for parking will go to the garage. And so a lot of the hunting will go away. That, over time, may change behavior patterns. It may change behavior patterns such that the actual amount of traffic coming across the bridge would go down. If, for example, if you are arriving at the park on some form of freeway, you may choose to take the Park Boulevard exit and go directly in from the east. I think I'm certainly not qualified to tell you how the model predicts that behavioral change, but I don't think that models do predict the behavioral change that is in that circling motion, which will now go away.
Well, you know right off the bat that you build something new, everyone's going to try it.
Sure.
Everyone will take that road once that's built. And some will realize that it is actually faster, easier way to get in. And so I think it's pretty obvious that you're going to see probably a 10-15% at least increase of traffic coming that direction. Now, a lot of your models and a lot of the justification, or even some of the positions that some folks and uptown planners have taken, is a concern about the other alternatives increasing vehicular traffic coming from that direction. And in your traffic analysis, you basically claimed that all the other alternatives have major traffic impacts, and a lot of which are not mitigable. But if you take into account just that one factor, that you would actually get an increase of traffic coming from that direction, all those conclusions change. And I believe that, that's why I really wanted a real strong answer on this, because it doesn't make sense to me that all of a sudden your alternative is the only one that has no real impacts on traffic, but every other alternative does. And I just think the conclusions that people are trying to make, a lot of positions that people have taken have been based on that data, and it's not, in my opinion, accurate.
Well, to follow up on the point that the proposed project is, or that all other alternatives have significant traffic impacts, that's not necessarily true. The alternatives that have the Centennial Road as a component of their project, which still allows the percentage of traffic to come across from the west and the percentage that comes across from the east, do not introduce any external traffic impacts. Unless the location of the parking structure had an impact on another intersection or segment along Park Boulevard. The alternatives that allow traffic to come in through the park do indeed create a significant traffic impact in the internal component of the park, and that's the Plaza de Panama. So essentially, the alternatives that are allowing traffic to come across from the west through the park, not going through the Plaza de Panama like it does today, do not have any outside significant or external significant traffic impacts. The alternatives that close the bridge do introduce the external traffic impacts. And the one-way alternatives, be it the precise plan or the modified precise plan as analyzed in the traffic study that allow traffic to come across the bridge, do have the internal significant impacts. So there's a wide range of the alternatives. But the alternatives with the Centennial Bridge do not introduce external traffic impacts because they're allowing the traffic to come across from the west. And additionally, the design is structured as such to reduce and eliminate the pedestrian crossings, which are causing the significant internal impacts at the Plaza de Panama. So that's kind of the overview conclusion as each of these alternatives are grouped into their respective roadway alignments.
And as you know, I also don't agree with the modeling that suggests that all those alternatives are going to be increasing major impacts around the park, primarily because the assumptions, which were not stated within anything within the environmental document, seems to assume that people will approach coming up Laurel Street, coming down 6th, 5th, 4th, whatever, to that location, and all of a sudden realize, oh, I can't get through there, so therefore I have to reroute on 6th, Robinson Park, or downtown C Street, whatever. When the reality is that if that's a permanent closure or permanent change, most of them are going to stay on the freeway and come off on Park Boulevard. So I think there's some faulty logic that was also within that, but it's hard to tell because there's no assumptions given anywhere within that document, and I did go through it in quite a bit of detail.
Correct. Well, the way the EIR is structured is that they have the sections that are essentially summaries of the technical documents themselves. So there is the traffic study with the appendices that have all of the assumptions and forecasting models described in that study and those associated appendices. Closing the bridge alternatives don't necessarily, or they do not just distribute the traffic evenly north and south. There is an increase, and it's upwards of the order of magnitude around 30 to 40%, depending on where those alternatives are. Of the traffic that's coming across from the west would stay on the highways, be it 163 or I-5, and come up from the south. So the redistribution that's associated with the closing the bridge alternatives is not a split, a 100% split, 50-50 impacting 6th Street and then going north through Robinson or A Street. There is over a third to 40% of the traffic is redistributed via the highways.
Would stay on the highways if they were there to start with.
Yes, if they know the bridge is closed, that percentage stays on the highways.
Another justification for the plan is to improve pedestrian safety. We're doing a lot to improve pedestrian safety, and I am very much an advocate for pedestrian safety. That's what I do, is my profession. However, one of the bases we always make on any type of a study or recommendation, whether it's a bike or a pedestrian master plan or facility improvements, is to base it upon collision data. And to date, I have not seen or heard of any collisions between cars and pedestrians, any data or documentation on that. I know there's a big difference between perception of safety and actual data that supports that there have been problems.
Yes, and I am not aware of any collision data that does exist or that has been officially reported. We have touched base with the City of San Diego Police Department as well as the Park and Rec, Park Rangers. But I counter that to the point where I don't think we need to wait for one to happen to warrant it. You don't need a collision-based warrant, in my opinion. And I think that the public testimony on the matter would suggest that the vehicular and pedestrian conflicts are significant, and they have trickle-down effects, and that's my personal opinion.
Mr. Singleton, I did personally witness a pedestrian hit by a car in the park in the Plaza de Panama 3.5 weeks ago on Sunday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He stepped up to the crosswalk, he looked to the left, and there was a noise on the right. He turned to look, and he forgot to look left again as he stepped forward. The vehicle was turning. He actually walked into it, bounced off of that vehicle, hit the sign that was behind him, and stumbled. He wasn't hurt, but I did see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that your plan will improve some of that safety. The question is at what cost? What cost to the history of the park, what cost to the aesthetics of the park, and at what cost in terms of funding. So I'm not going to argue with you on some levels of improvements, but you know as well as I do that there are traffic calming measures, there's ways, Europe does this all the time in terms of mixing pedestrians and cars. The most important thing is that it's a dominant pedestrian area, and there's a lot of other techniques that could be done to improve that besides a bypass bridge. The conflicts that we actually have on the right turn, certainly we're trading off the right turn after you get to the Plaza de Panama, where you have some conflicts there, and we're exchanging that for a large number of folks that walk across the bridge and bike across the bridge with a new location and a new conflict point. I noticed all your simulations do not show a stop sign. The video model does not show it. Your renderings do not show it. I assume that there's going to be a stop sign for that right-hand turn and the left-hand turn back out of the Centennial.
That is correct. It is going to be an always stop, so it'll be a T 90-degree intersection with stop signs, stopping traffic before they make the turn. And there is a pedestrian crosswalk from the west to the east. In addition, the volume of vehicles making that right-hand turn will stay the same as it does today and in the proposed project. We are not adjusting any of the volume of vehicles. However, there is a significant reduction of pedestrians that are crossing that crosswalk. For the right-hand turn of the Centennial Bridge, it's on the order of magnitude of about 245 that we did count, versus almost 700 that the right-hand turn vehicle crosses in the Plaza de Panama today. There's about 135 that are doing the south to north movement, and then there's over 500 that are doing the west to east movement in conflict with that right-hand turn. So the proposed right-hand turn of the project is a significant reduction in pedestrian movements crossing that turn.
But the alternative is in Plaza de Panama, the way it's treated and allowing cars to still go through a portion of that. If that occurred that way, pedestrians have options to be able to walk all around that without crossing vehicular travel if they wish to.
They would have that option, that is true, and they would also have that option with the Centennial Bridge because they can go on the north side of the crosswalk.
Okay. Mark, on the conclusions that you made back in the old circulation, parking, and land use study, basically had, I think it was 3 parking structures, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
3. Inspiration Point was one that we supported. I was on the committee at the time when you're doing that work. We supported Inspiration Point primarily with the tram system. I was not very supportive of 3 parking structures. I always assumed that the city was never going to afford more than 1. My question to you is that I think we're putting all of our public eggs in one basket right now if we put this particular parking structure behind the Oregon Pavilion. My guess is that the zoo, as they move forward, they've looked at and wanted public investment in that parking structure for the promenade project. And Inspiration Point, which I still believe is the best place for a parking structure, those will go away. We're going to have one chance at this, and it's going to be one structure. And because everything, unless someone's going to come along and pay for it, you know, even on this one, Irwin didn't want to pay for the structure. No one's going to want to come up and pay for a structure down the line. So my concern is that we are putting it in the heart of the park, but it's going to really prevent any of those other parking structures from ever occurring. And is it really the best location given only one parking structure in terms of distribution? Because before you came up with completely different conclusions. If just to remind you, you were paid almost $1 million to analyze whether or not the Oregon Pavilion was the best place for a parking structure, and your conclusions were it was not.
Understand. And there are substantially similar conclusions. They're not all different. Just for everyone in the room, the parking and land use circulation study that Mike's referring to, we worked closely together on that, and I very much appreciate his input on that. The conclusion of that, the final recommendation, which achieved a level of consensus and support from the Balboa Park Committee and from the Park and Rec Advisory Board, I will add as well, included a parking garage, a very large parking garage at Inspiration Point, a very large parking garage which is known as the Zoo Park Promenade Project up near Village Place, and a small parking garage behind the Old Globe just north of the Cabrillo Bridge in the Canyon area there. It also included a transit vehicle that would run from 6th to Park Boulevard on Laurel Street, on the Prado. So it would have a sort of back and forth shuttle that would go from Park all the way to 6th, going back and forth. And then it had a second tier, a secondary transit vehicle that would form a loop to connect those garages with destinations. So it was a combination of a heavy emphasis on parking, a heavy emphasis on transit, and a heavy emphasis on an internal circulator. But you'll also remember that one of the things that I pushed very hard for was a carrying capacity on parking within the park. And what I was trying to accomplish was a carrying capacity of 8,500 cars on the Central Mesa, including the Inspiration Point. If you go back and look at the plan amendment that I showed you earlier on the parking counts for the precise plan amendment that we're proposing, it in fact reduces the 9,300 down to an 8,600 parking stall level, approximately 8,600. Coming closer to that parking capacity I was shooting for. And part of my logic in that is having created a plan that around which we achieved consensus, but which was in excess of $400 million, and finding that there was no support for that, I find now that maintaining the parking cap at 8,500 is very logical, and centralizing the garage, in fact, is a very logical response also. You probably also will remember that in the Planning Commission action on the 2004 study, the Planning Commission's condition of their approval of the plan was that the feasibility of the Oregon Pavilion structure go into the technical feasibility and not be put back in as a recommendation. So whether that was their wisdom or whatever, they in fact did not fully agree with the recommendation.
Well, certainly thank the board members for patience on this, but I had a number of questions that had not been answered that I thought was important for me to understand a lot more on. So I can kind of guess where this is going, since I've been able to shut down on 2 different motions already. But so as just part of the overall discussion, I feel that though this has been a very widely discussed plan, from day one, I have not really seen a change in the plan. We've had plenty of opinions expressed on this board and the public in general. I do believe the plan's been refined, and I do believe that there's a lot of good parts to the plan. But I also feel that we're setting a precedence here, which unfortunately with the budget problems that we have, this board, not a lot of you, or this committee, but not a lot of you here right now, didn't have the chance to work on the foundation plans that we worked on, and we made a commitment to the public that the park would not be privatized. We knew that there was a major reason for getting partners to invest in the park. We knew that there was a lot of things were not going to get done just by the city, so we had to bring in the general public, volunteers, and philanthropists. But in the same sense, a person shouldn't be able to buy their way into the park and insist on one solution. And so, the precedence that it sets is the fact that this has not really been a public process. It's been applicant-submitted plan that we're trying to react to and are kind of put in a corner to have to pick and choose. At this point, yes or no. I would have preferred to say yes on a lot of things and no on a couple things. But we've been put into that position because of the process. And if the process is an unbending process, does not take into account the general public and other interests and the values that a lot of people put in this park, then it sets a very tough precedent for the next person who wants to come along and follow the Jacobs model, which is invest heavily in PR, invest heavily in, which I think is, as I mentioned before, a lot of it is a well-designed plan, but if we could have taken anywhere near that amount of money and applied it to Mr. Lewis's alternate B plan, we would have had, I think, an even better plan than what you have. But you're... You were probably not allowed to do that. You were probably not allowed to vary that much from what Ern wanted and what the mayor wants. I'm just saying that I think it sets a very tough precedent for us in the park. We want to encourage private investment and philanthropy in the park, but I think it needs to be done as the process needs to follow through with the public saying a lot about it, and that it needs to be a flexible process. I work on planning projects like this all the time. My work on Fiesta Island, 13 alternatives based on what the public has wanted and the adjustments that we keep making. Though this plan is a refined alternative from what you started with, I don't basically see it changed any from what was originally said from the original press release and conference that was about a year and a half ago. So I just feel that this is setting a real tough precedence for us to follow. I'd love to support the entire thing, but unfortunately, since you're not going to allow me to vote on the parts that I like, I certainly have to turn it down.
Comments, questions from the committee? Mr. Stepke.
One of my concerns early on were the parking garage projections. I see they continue to be revised downward, and my information regarding the from the independent budget analyst is that the bonding capacity isn't maybe what it could be, and putting all those pieces of the puzzle together and knowing that if I have to pay $5 or $10 to park and there's a space across the street for free, gee, I'll go with free. And if enough people choose the free option, then you're probably not going to have a real crowded garage. And as you know, I'm from North Park, and we've got a garage there, and it's not real crowded, and there's lots of free parking. So I'm just saying. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Comments? Dr. Hager?
Well, we've heard a lot about cars and bridges and parking lots, but from my perspective, this is about the visitor experience. About 6.2 acres of pedestrian space, festival and celebration spaces, and access from the west and the east. I think that the Jacobs plan provides the proper balance, and the cultural institutions of Balboa Park fully support it.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments, questions? Dr. Khan?
Yeah, well, so I was born in Sharp Hospital, and my family comes to Balboa Park 150 times a year. And I was part of the 2008 Future of Balboa Park report effort, which looked at, ways of funding this park and maintaining its attractiveness and beauty and central role in the lives of San Diegans. And my personal view, after having studied, diligently the materials that have been put before this committee, listening to enormous numbers of inputs, and actually I've typed down pretty much every public comment that has been given in these 17 previous meetings. When you weigh the availability of this catalyst of timing and funding against the city's finances and its historic way of managing these finances and the needs of a large population that's very different from the population of 50 or 100 years ago, it seems to me that the arguments given by some of the public that this is, an opportunity to be seized that will not recur in our lifetimes, is valid. I personally feel that there's a need to look forward to the future and not to the past. I don't think that the perfect should be the enemy of the good, which I feel is, I admire Weldon Jones's, prose and, that I've read over the years, but, seeking perfection in this instance is impossible because in my field we would call this an over-constrained problem. We simply want to do the best for the most people in a practical and feasible way. And so, there is a tragedy of the commons today in Balboa Park, and personally, not just because my constituency in the Rec Council, wants to support this plan, but as a San Diegan and a native San Diegan at that, I support this plan for these reasons.
Thank you, sir. Comments? Questions? Last call. That's a little bit later. Seeing none, then it's time to vote. The motion is to approve the plan amendments and site plan for this project as presented. Is that? So all of those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I'm the only one abstaining as chair. So the ayes have it. The motion has been approved. Before we leave, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank the staff, Mike and Susan, for all the help they are on a regular basis, but especially with this project. As this is our last agenda item, unless the committee has any objections, I see none. I call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.